Bonjour, good morning. George Floyd. The images and the video of his killing were chilling. They're images that we can't shake from our collective minds. It was painful. It was stomach churning. The casual violence, the callousness that it took to take someone's life in that way, the police officer taking the life of George Floyd. And I want to start today to talk about and reflect on the anti-Black racism that we are seeing in our society. We've seen in America, and right now people are hurting. When you see someone that looks like you being killed like that, it makes you feel like you have no worth and no value. It makes you angry. And I speak as an ally, someone who has felt the painful words and the physical violence of racism. And I have responded in anger. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to fight back. And I understand the anger. I understand the frustration. I've heard people talk about enough's enough. How many lives must be taken? How many lives more will be taken? When will anti-Black racism end? Those are fair questions. Those are real questions. Those are real frustrations. And those are fair and legitimate frustrations. But I also want to say that while we look to the States, this is not just an American issue. Here in Canada, we face anti-Black racism as well. Black people have died at the hands of police. Right now in Toronto, people are reeling from the death of Regis Kurchinski-Paquette, and people are calling for justice for Regis. And thousands took to the street calling for that justice. We know that anti-Indigenous racism and deaths of Indigenous people at the hands of police is something far too common. So we have our own issues here in Canada, and we can't shy away from the anti-Black racism that exists and the frustration that people hear and feel. I don't have all the answers. I think we are going to have to come up with those answers together collectively. But I can say a couple of things. To quote Killer Mike, an organizer and activist in the Black community in the States, he talks about the importance for people right now to channel that frustration and that anger, to organize, to strategize, and to mobilize. Use the power that we have to fight back in the political realms, to organize and fight for systemic change. And a couple of things that we need when it comes to systemic change. One, it is very clear we need systemic change when it comes to policing. There needs to be really clear training around de-escalation. We see far too many incidences, so many incidents where a tense situation escalates instead of de-escalating and their life is taken. There needs to be a focus on de-escalation. There needs to be an end to discriminatory policing, which erodes public trust. Carding and practices like carding, where people are stopped, particularly racialized people, particularly Black people, are stopped just because of the color of their skin. It erodes trust between the public and police. And that makes it harder for everyone. It makes society less safe. It hurts everyone. We also need to tackle the injustice in the criminal justice system, the over-policing of Black bodies and Black lives, and the over-incarceration. And then finally, what we need to do is tackle the inequality, which perpetuates the undervaluing of Black life, of racialized people's lives. The inequality that exists, and we know it so clearly when it comes to access to education, when it comes to access to healthcare, health outcomes, access to employment, housing. We know that Black people, racialized people, Indigenous people are disproportionately impacted. So we need to tackle that inequality. We need more affordable housing. We need to ensure there's better outcomes for health, access to resources. And we need to make sure we have the data, that there's race-based data that allows us to make the evidence-based decision-making to remedy these injustices. There's a lot that we need to do, but we can come together and do it. There's a lot of pain and frustration, but we can channel that pain and frustration into action and into justice. I'm not someone who calls for peace. I believe we must call for justice. Justice is the only path towards creating a better world. Merci. And I just want to take a moment to talk about something very troubling in Canada as well. We know so many seniors have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19 and the devastating impact it's had on long-term care homes. We've just now learned, in addition to those horrible loss of life, those horrible deaths, that while we were asking the Prime Minister, while I was asking the Prime Minister to play a federal role, and the Prime Minister was making excuses, at the same time, during this pandemic, during the time when seniors were being devastated, lives were being lost, private for-profit long-term care homes, their corporate lobbyists were meeting with the government. They met with the Liberal government over 12 times. This is the same for-profit long-term care home that was giving out hundreds and millions in dividends to their shareholders while this devastation of COVID-19 was racking the long-term care system. And so that to me is also very troubling, that the Prime Minister could on one hand say there's no role for the federal government, make excuses, and on the other hand, his very Liberal government was meeting with lobbyists from for-profit long-term care homes where we've seen the worst conditions. That to me is also very troubling. Donc, ce qu'on a vu avec les réponses du Premier ministre, il a souvent dit que ce n'est pas le rôle du gouvernement fédéral de faire quelque chose pour améliorer la situation dans les soins de longue durée pour nos aînés. Et pendant le même temps que la crise a impacté beaucoup de nos aînés, en même temps, son gouvernement, le gouvernement libéral, a rencontré des lobbyistes, des entreprises de soins de longue durée privées et pour profit. Et en même temps, il a dit que non, on n'a pas un rôle à jouer. Le Premier ministre a dit ça. Et en même temps, son gouvernement a rencontré des lobbyistes qui ont eu des profits des millions de dollars. Donc, je la trouve troublant et je veux le souligner ça aussi. And if you have any questions, I'm prepared to take any of your questions.
We'll now start the question period. Comme d'habitude, une question et une question de suivi. We'll start with a question on the phone and then we'll turn to the room. Opérateur au téléphone, première question.
Thank you. Merci. Étoile 1 pour question. Star 1 for questions. Première question, Christian Noël, Radio-Canada, à vous.
Bonjour, M. Singh. D'abord, vous parlez de race et de CHSLD et de COVID. J'aimerais savoir, est-ce que vous croyez que le Canada en fait suffisamment pour amasser les données basées sur la race touchant la COVID pour voir justement s'il y a des inégalités à ce niveau-là? Et si oui, vous pensez qu'on trouverait quoi?
Non, mais merci infiniment pour la question parce que c'est tellement important. Un de mes collègues, Matthew Green de Hamilton Center, a posé la même question. Il a proposé une motion pour améliorer le système de données pour mieux connaître les impacts spécifiques basés sur la race. Parce qu'on sait, c'était tellement clair avec la preuve des États-Unis que les personnes racisées sont plus impactées par la COVID-19. Et c'est un autre exemple, une autre preuve qui montre l'inégalité qui existe dans notre système de santé, accès aux services. Et c'est exactement pourquoi il faut avoir plus de données sur cette question. Et c'est exactement ça, les données qui nous ont aidés de trouver des solutions pour la pratique à Toronto de carding. Et c'est exactement ça. Si on a les données, on peut avoir des politiques pour régler le problème. Mais sans avoir la preuve, sans avoir les données, c'est difficile.
Merci. Sur un autre ordre d'idée, les municipalités vont recevoir de l'argent pour les infrastructures aujourd'hui, semble-t-il, mais pas d'argent pour leurs besoins d'opération actuels, alors que c'est là que le bas blesse. Est-ce que le gouvernement fédéral en fait suffisamment pour les villes? Vous pensez qu'il devrait faire quoi?
Non, effectivement, c'est positif que le gouvernement a proposé quelque chose, mais ce qu'ils ont proposé, ce n'est pas exactement ce que les municipalités ont besoin. Ils ont dit qu'à cause de COVID-19, ils ont un manque de ressources pour continuer de livrer les services et pour continuer d'avoir les nombres des employés. Donc, ce qu'ils ont demandé, c'est effectivement un backstop, un financement direct aux municipalités pour continuer d'embaucher les travailleurs, mais aussi pour de continuer de livrer les services. C'était vraiment leur demande et on a envoyé une lettre directement au gouvernement pour demander la même chose, le financement direct aux municipalités et aussi les financements pour les services qui les municipalités livrent. Sure. The delivery, Christian, ils ont posé la question en anglais aussi. Ils ont demandé que je répète en anglais. On the municipality. And so what the government has announced, though it is a positive step that they've announced some funding, it's not exactly what cities need. What cities have made very clear is that they are facing a massive shortfall in funding, which will mean losing employees and losing the ability to deliver services. So what we've called for is direct financing to support municipalities in this crisis, to directly allow them to continue to keep their staff hired and to continue to deliver services. That needs to be the focus of help to municipalities.
Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question. Jim Bronskill, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Mr. Singh.
Good morning.
On the issue of race and data that you mentioned, the Prime Minister has talked about giving StatCan more money to collect better data, for instance, on Black Canadians and their interactions with different facets of society. In short, has the government done enough? Has it followed through? Are you familiar with what has been promised and what needs to be done there?
No, they've not followed through. The government was in government for 4 years in a majority. This has been an ask of the Black community for a long time. This has been an ask of racialized communities for a long time. We know that there are disparate impacts when it comes to education, healthcare, criminal justice, employment based on the color of one's skin. And we need the evidence of that to be able to make better decisions. And so far, the government has not responded adequately and robustly to ensure that we have the adequate data based on race so that we can make better decisions. And I cite the example of carding in Toronto because it was directly a result of the evidence that was obtained, the number of stops in communities, the population of racialized people in those communities, and how disproportionate the stops were that the police were making when it came to people of color, particularly Black people, particularly Indigenous people. And so that's something that we can point to as an example. When we have the data, then we can point to the problem and then fix it. And that's something that the federal government has not done enough. That's why my colleague Matthew Green from Hamilton Centre put forward a unanimous consent motion pushing the government to do better when it comes to data, specifically in this case for COVID-19 related impacts, but we need better data so that we can make better decisions.
Thank you. On the issue of long-term care that you also mentioned, there seems to be some tension and some perhaps reluctance on the part of the federal government, naturally, given the provincial responsibility for healthcare and jurisdictional issues there. Do you see a way for the federal government to do more without treading on the toes of the provinces?
Absolutely. The federal government can do more. The federal government can show leadership, and that's what we've been calling for. We absolutely have a shared jurisdiction when it comes to healthcare, which means we need to work together, and we should be working together. But that doesn't mean that the federal government can't lead and say and put out a value statement very clearly that the evidence, the fact that military had to go into long-term care homes, the conditions that the military reported on, their report pointing to the deep concerns that cost of supplies limited the use of supplies, that staff were afraid of the cost of supplies and weren't using vital equipment. And we saw syringes being reused between different seniors. We saw horrible conditions where medication was expired, and a whole host of cost-saving measures that meant that seniors were put at risk, which makes it clear that for-profit long-term care has no place in our long-term care system. The government should be able to put out that clear statement. The government should also, the Liberal government could also make a clear statement saying we will push for national standards, working with the provinces and territories to develop those standards, and let's set standards based on what we've learned. The federal government's been taking a passive role, saying that we'll work with provinces. That's not good enough. In a crisis that required the military to go into long-term care, simply stating that the Prime Minister Trudeau is willing to work with provinces is not good enough. It does not cut it. It does not respond to the pain that families who've lost their loved ones in long-term care feel right now, and the fear that people fear when they think about their loved ones that are in long-term care. They need far more than just a passive willingness to work together, but an active role of the federal government. Mind you, this is the same government that at the time they're saying that they didn't have a role, were meeting with lobbyists from a for-profit long-term care home that was giving out hundreds of millions of dollars in dividends. I mean, that to me shows exactly who this Liberal government's working for and why we need to continue to push them to do better.
Operator, next question on the phone, please.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Je voulais seulement revenir, bonjour, sur la subvention salariale. On a eu beaucoup de critiques de la part des gens qui estiment que ce ne devrait pas aller à des partis politiques. Depuis, on a vu, par exemple, le Parti québécois qui a renoncé à ça devant les critiques du Bloc québécois. Donc, je voudrais vous demander, pourquoi trouvez-vous que c'est justifié au NPD de toucher de la subvention salariale?
C'est un choix entre le fait qu'à cause du manque de ressources, ces membres de notre équipe, ces travailleurs et travailleuses, le choix c'était de leur faire partir à cause du fait qu'on n'a pas les ressources pour les payer. Et puis, ils devront avoir accès à quelque chose comme la PCU, les autres subventions, les autres programmes fédéraux, ou d'utiliser les subventions salariales pour leur but, qui était de garder les gens dans leur emploi. Pour moi, c'était facile. Je suis pour les subventions salariales parce que je crois que c'est tellement important de garder les gens dans leur milieu de travail et c'est exactement pourquoi le parti a décidé de faire ça, mais j'appuie la décision.
Et ça représente combien d'argent pour le NPD? On ne nous l'a pas dit encore.
Je n'ai pas les chiffres exactement, mais on peut vous donner les chiffres.
We'll now take a question in the room. Mackenzie Gray.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Mackenzie Gray with CTV.
Yes.
Chief Saunders in Toronto, he brought up the idea that the city should expedite putting body cameras on police officers. Right now, it's not really common in Canada. The RCMP doesn't do it. Then not many local or provincial police forces do that. Do you think that should be something that's mandatory for police forces across the country?
Yes, it's something that I've previously in my previous life provincially talked about the importance of, and I think it's something that is well supported by the evidence. And it would allow for accountability. You know, someone mentioned, do we think as a society that there's more anti-Black racism? And really, it's not that there's more anti-Black racism. It's always existed. There's just more cameras to catch it. And having that layer of accountability is something that many task force have recommended. And the fact that the chief of police is also calling for it is an encouraging thing.
Many protests across the country yesterday, but in Vancouver, the Black Lives Matter group out there said, quote, "We cannot safely gather together, but we stand together for justice for the various people and the various causes." Are you concerned about a potential uptick in COVID-19 because of these protests that have gone on over the last few days?
Well, it's the idea and the concern that we're all faced with a pretty serious concern around the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's obviously is very top of mind. We've made massive sacrifices, but when there's a lot of frustration and pain when there is an issue that's so compelling and so painful that people need to protest. I understand that, and I see how important that is. I have felt that pain in my life, and I see the idea of coming together and organizing as a productive and positive way to express that. I think that what we need to do as we move forward is find ways to gather safely and to do things in a safe way. So as the public health expert has said, if we can't physically distance, that we should wear masks. So that's something that's probably advisable. But we shouldn't limit the ability for people to organize and to collectively demonstrate. There's a power in that and importance in that.
We'll turn back to the phone. Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. Star 1 again. Étoile 1 encore pour toute question. Il n'y a plus de questions au téléphone. De retour à vous.
This concludes the press conference this morning. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you.
Thank you. The conference has now ended. Please hang up your lines at this time, and we thank you for your participation. Merci. La conférence est maintenant terminée. Veuillez s'il vous plaît raccrocher vos lignes et merci.